yeah, I had this feeling that, I'm on the same list as criminals, mobsters, mafia
I
heads.
told you, you're enemy of the state. Come on, accept
But at the
it.
same time, I'm on the list with very respected people. So
Okay.
I felt pride, I felt shame, I was shocked, but most of all, I was full of adrenaline. And in a very perverted way, I was extremely happy that I have access to this great material. Like, this is something that every journalist wants to work on.
Czech Center for Investigative Reporting and Dark Riviera present Protagonista, a war room content project hosted by Pavla Holcová. Protagonista puts investigative reporters at the heart of the story. Szabolcs Panyi is a Hungarian investigative reporter whose career was formed by his country's authoritarian descent. Szabolcs exposes the political mechanics of crime and uncovers Russian intelligence operations penetrating Hungary's core.
Basically, I started out with opinion pieces, with columns,
Then you switched to investigative reporting.
And then I switched to newsroom journalism first. And when I realized that I'm just too slow for newsroom journalism, then I switched to investigative journalism.
What was your first story about?
So I was already working at Index, which then used to be Hungary's largest independent news site. And it was in the summer of 2014 when a source who turned to me because I was a journalist, and the story was about that a girl was found in a restroom of a department store in Budapest, raped and unconscious, and that this girl was working for an MP in Parliament, and she had some celebration the previous night where I don't remember if the MP showed up, but certainly some political aides to this MP showed up, and then we don't know what happened. And then I dug into that, but got into nowhere. Mm-hmm. But I got very familiar with how women are getting drugged in bars and then getting raped, like rape drugs, or how's it called in English? And a couple of weeks after, I received a tip about a different story that rapes were happening at Hungarian campuses. There's this tradition in Hungary that the freshmen are, before entering university, they go to a so-called freshman camp, which is somewhere outside of Budapest, in the woods or at Lake Balaton, or
to become friends.
And then they do certain games. These are like heavily sexualized games. These are all organized by the more senior students or the student union. They drink a lot of alcohol. And this was the first story that I investigated. It was about a rape case at the law faculty of ELTE, which is like a very prestigious faculty. That's where Viktor Orbán and half of his government is coming from or used to teach, because they're all lawyers. And that story was basically my first big investigative story, and probably the story that had the most impact, because after that these freshman camps were suspended nationwide. Like all freshman camps were suspended pending the investigation into how they were organized. And also that was my first experience of talking on background to a lot of people. It was like semi-traumatizing also, because I talked to more like, 10 girls who went through... Victims.
Did you get any training how to talk to the victims, not to re-traumatize them again?
No training, and myself got traumatized during that process. In retrospect, I could realize that. But it was like extremely interesting. I mean, these victims were in like different stages of processing what happened to them. Some could talk very objectively, like from a completely outside perspective, in a very naturalistic way of what happened, while others were like shy to say out words what were happening to them. I was basically jumping into something that I did not expect. I was not trained for it. Very likely I was too soft for this topic, but somehow it made me feel that I do have some skills to do this job. Like I can sit down with people, they feel that they can trust me and that they share very intimate stories about what happened to them. Yeah, but even with this case that I discovered, the rape at this Budapest law faculty campus, even that had political ties because rape happened because the human nature does not change. This is something that will happen again. The question is how the institutions react to it. If they facilitate such crimes, if they cover up such crimes, or if they stand up against these things and if they are willing to change. In this case, what was very interesting is that the main organizer, who was responsible legally for this whole thing, wanted to suppress the information. This person started dating the victim so that she could be emotionally manipulated.
So it's like Andrew Tate in Hungary 10 years ago.
Yeah. And this person, who was also responsible for the whole organization, like also legally and financially for it, he was probably still is a member of the ruling party. And he was like the main activist coordinator in a Budapest district at elections. So he was the one who instructed the activists of Orbán's Fidesz party to collect petitions for candidates, for example. And after this story, he got fired, I think, as head of this student association. But then I discovered that he got hired as an assistant to a person that was running the orphanages in the country.
Any other terrible stories coming from this connection?
At some point, I stopped following the career of this guy.
Maybe that's good for you. Okay, so you started to report more on politics after those stories. Trauma.
No, it just organically came that that was 10 years ago. That the main story that was starting back then was Russian influence in Hungary. In the past 10 years, I was probably 80% of my work was focusing on Russian influence in Hungary, business deals, espionage, corruption, and other sweet topics.
Why don't you like Russia?
That's an insinuation. Actually, in many of my investigations, I worked with a Russian intern, a guy who's been living in Hungary for a very long time, but ethnically he's Russian, and he helped me out with Russia-related research.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. Why did you got so much into Russian influence and Russian operations, and why don't you report on US operations as well?
Well, I mean, if there were US operations in Hungary, I would love to report on them. I felt that Hungary has entered a new stage, and that also Viktor Orbán and our politics has entered a new stage, because his government was voted to office running not just on an anti-corruption platform. We had, before Orbán, a terrible socialist government, very corrupt, lots of scandals, and very close to Vladimir Putin. And the promise of Orbán was that he's going to break with this renewed tradition of tying Hungary's future to Moscow. And then all of a sudden, after 2010, we saw that basically he's just continuing where the previous government has left. And we all suspected, me and my colleagues and a lot of people in Hungary, that there must be a reason for that. There must be some financial incentives, and there must be some
financial
secrets.
incentives. You mean corruption?
Financial incentives meaning corruption, but already by 2014 we had lots of corruption stories about the Orbán government, and people already started not caring about these corruption stories because they were all over. But I believe that it's a different quality of corruption story when it's not a businessman corrupting a Hungarian government official or a Hungarian government official stealing public funds, but a foreign country corrupting the Hungarian elite, buying influence and hijacking the foreign policy of a country like Hungary. So I felt that this is the most important thing that is happening in Hungary, that Russia is already inside the system, that they penetrated even a former anti-communist, anti-Russian party, and Hungary not only voted back the former communists into office, we never disbanded our communist secret service. Those people who served in the 70s and the 80s, they kept on serving in the 90s and in the 2000s.
Okay, so we slightly touched the secret service, but we are not getting there yet. First, do you remember any stories that were big and that you understood, now I'm going to piss some really powerful people, I should be more careful? Or what do you think were the stories that actually attracted attention of the government or secret service towards you and towards your name or your stories? Or
I remember that in 2016 I was working together with two colleagues, one of them Nikita, my Russian intern, about the most powerful cabinet member in the Orbán government. And we tried to identify how he's involved in lots of corruption issues. He's a very smart guy. He's currently the minister in charge of propaganda.
How does he look like?
How does he look like?
You know, this is audio podcast. Many people.
He looks like he has the face of a person who always looks like he's very tired. His face is also very unemotional. It's almost like a mask.
Like you?
Thank you.
No, you have some emotions. Okay, I admit.
He put a lot of effort into appearing in tabloid articles, to have articles written about very mundane and very uninteresting personal life events. He tried to make effort to be likable, but deep down he was seen as someone very corrupt. And when journalists, including myself, uncovered all of his corrupt deals, after some point he basically disappeared from public life, in a way that he remained in position, but he stopped giving interviews, he stopped appearing in articles. There were just so many corruption stories about him that either Viktor Orbán himself or this guy, his name is Antal Rogán, he decided that he should be out of the spotlight. And this article, this project was conducted for many months, and Rogán knew very well that we were preparing something explosive on him. And what they did is that just before we wanted to publish our article, they started spreading disinformation.
About you?
No, disinformation about his close associate being arrested by the Hungarian counterterrorism agency, and that hundreds of millions of forints were found.
So they pretty much sacrificed someone else to take the blame or to take the hit.
No, what they did is that they tried to peddle a fake story. This arrest never happened. They tried to make us believe that this guy got arrested, in hope that we will include this as part of the story, and once we publish it, they can debunk it, and then that would discredit all of our other findings. And what happened is that when this disinformation was spread, basically every Hungarian journalist knew about this, and we all sent our comment requests to the prosecutors, to the police, to the counterterrorism forces, to the ministries, and got no replies for days. And then there was one outlet who was bold enough to publish the story without a confirmation.
Ooh.
And after they published that, suddenly all of the authorities, they sent the replies to all of the journalists that this is fake, it never happened. Then we waited one more week, and then we published our own story. And actually it became even bigger after this.
So this was one of the big stories that brought you to the attention of powerful people. So it's not enough to become the enemy of the state, no, what you later became. So what was the next story and how it grew up?
Well, it's hard to tell if I became the enemy of the state, because no, I never became an enemy of the state. The problem in Hungary is that our state is hijacked by private interests, and that politicians who also happen to be criminals, they use state authorities, state bodies, and sometimes even the intelligence services for their private interests. In the subsequent years, I really focused on Russian influence in Hungary. That's when apparently, while I was investigating it, someone else was investigating me.
So, how did you learn that you are being under surveillance?
Well, already back in the 2010s, there were stories on which I worked where I knew I was surveilled or followed.
How did you find out you are being followed or under surveillance if you aren't trained to understand you are? Or are you trained?
No, and that's a problem, actually. But I was just told recently that one of the ways how the counterintelligence discovers if someone's a spy is that if they can see that person is trained and looks out for followers. So, but maybe that's my disguise, that I act as if I was untrained.
You're double trained.
Yeah. I had a meeting with a potential source. This source was not supposed to meet me. The story was about a murder case, and it was.
How could you handle it? I mean, like, you do rape case, you do murder case. It's all connected to politics, and you still live in the country.
You do the same, no? I mean.
Yeah. Well. Okay.
We're all into this business.
Okay, you've been.
Yeah, it was a murder case, but it was also related to Russia and the GRU. And it's a little complicated.
GRU as a military secret service.
Yes. And while I was to meet this source, I recognized, actually, I had someone with me who was trained. Can you see that guy over there and that guy over there? Like we are followed. And then I was like, okay, are you sure? And then he said, okay, so if we turn to that corner, and if there's going to be a person, just opposite of the entrance where we go in, then we're completely sure that we're being followed. And there was a guy standing there. And after the meeting, when I was going home by train, I was alone in a train cabin. But at the door, there was a guy standing, but he was not looking at me. He was looking at me through the reflection of the window. And he was just standing there, short hair, leather jacket, like very classic.
Yeah, stereotypical
appearance. Had no luggage. He got on the train when I got on the train. He got off the train one station before I got off the train, and he was just standing there staring at me through the reflection, never facing me.
Was he armed?
I don't know. The whole idea was to send a message to me that my meeting was compromised. And whatever I learned there, I was not able to use, because then my source would have gotten into trouble. But they surely wanted to send a message that we see you, we know what you're doing, we know whom you're meeting. And then, because of source protection reasons, very obviously, since the meeting was compromised, I couldn't finish that story.
That's scary.
And obviously, so if there was physical surveillance on me when I was meeting a source, it also means that these people already knew that I'm going to meet him.
Yeah.
So my communication was already intercepted.
What did you do right after? But you can't, because, you understand you are being under surveillance.
Yeah.
And then to do what? Go shopping? Or because you can't meet anyone?
Yeah, I was quite paranoid after this. And mentally, psychologically dealing with these things were not that easy in the beginning for a couple of years. That's actually a big problem for some journalists in Hungary, especially in the older generation, that
their dark side.
That you can get very easily very paranoid when at some point you just start imagining that you're being followed or really starting to have mental problems because of this.
So what did you do?
I just worked more and more and more. Work therapy always worked for me. So whenever I have any problem, I just work, and I just didn't want to have any free time to think about these things. Journalists, especially investigative journalists, should be objective. We should be unbiased. We should not be driven by anger or any, personal interest. I have to admit that for a couple of years, I was very angry. Of course, my stories were well edited, but part of the drive that led me to work on stories was anger.
Okay, let's jump to your surveillance.
More calm these days. My surveillance.
Let me through it. How did you learn? Can you describe the situation? How did you learn that, okay, I have spyware on my phone?